In the heart of the Arizona desert, where the sun blazed fiercely and the winds carried whispers of ancient stories, a young woman named Clara lived a life filled with quiet determination. She was a settler, one of many who had come to this untamed land seeking a fresh start. Her small cabin stood on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by endless stretches of dry earth and jagged rocks. It wasn't much, but it was home, or at least it had been until recently. Clara's days were long and hard, just like those of every other settler in the area. She worked tirelessly alongside her husband, Thomas, tending to their crops, fetching water from the distant stream, and keeping their modest home in order. Life was never easy for people trying to carve out an existence in such a harsh environment. But Clara endured it all without complaint. She believed that hard work would eventually pay off, and that their struggles would pave the way for a better future. What she didn't know was that her greatest challenge was yet to come. Not long ago, Clara had given birth to a baby girl they named Emily. The arrival of the child should have brought joy and warmth into their lives, filling their little cabin with laughter and love. But instead it marked the beginning of Clara's darkest days. From the moment Emily was born, Thomas seemed distant, almost resentful. At first, Clara thought it was simply because he was overwhelmed by the added responsibility of caring for a newborn. After all, raising a child in such a barren place was no small feat. But as weeks turned into months, his behavior grew colder, more unpredictable. Thomas rarely spoke to Clara anymore, and when he did, his words were sharp and cutting. He blamed her for bringing another mouth to feed, accusing her of being selfish and careless. "We barely have enough for ourselves," he would snap, glaring at her as if she had done something wrong. Clara tried to explain that having a child wasn't something she could control, but her words fell on deaf ears. Each argument left her feeling smaller, more invisible, as though she were fading away bit by bit. The tension between them reached its peak one sweltering afternoon. The air inside the cabin felt thick and suffocating, and the cries of little Emily only added to the chaos. Clara was exhausted, her body still recovering from childbirth, but she forced herself to keep going. Feeding the baby and cleaning up after yet another meal, Thomas stormed in, his face red with anger, carrying the weight of frustration from a day spent battling the unforgiving land outside. When Emily started wailing again, something inside him snapped. "You're useless," he shouted, slamming his fist against the wooden table. The sound echoed through the tiny space, making Clara flinch. She clutched Emily closer to her chest, trying to shield her from both the noise and the venom in Thomas's voice. "This child is nothing but trouble. You should have known better than to bring her into this mess." Clara opened her mouth to defend herself, tears welling up in her eyes, but before she could say anything, Thomas cut her off. "Get out," he growled, pointing toward the door. "Take your brat and leave. I don't want either of you here." For a moment, Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. Surely he didn't mean it. Surely he wouldn't cast her out into the wilderness with a newborn baby. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. It was cold, devoid of any trace of compassion or humanity. He meant every word. With trembling hands, Clara wrapped Emily in a thin blanket and gathered a few essentials: a piece of bread, a flask of water, and a spare cloth diaper. Her mind raced with fear and uncertainty. Where would she go? How would she survive? The desert was merciless, especially for someone traveling alone with an infant. But staying wasn't an option either, not with Thomas in such a rage. As she stepped outside, the heat hit her like a wall. The sun hung high in the sky, relentless and unforgiving. Clara adjusted the bundle in her arms, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She glanced back at the cabin one last time, half hoping Thomas might change his mind, might call her back and apologize. But the door remained closed, and silence greeted her. With no choice but to move forward, Clara began walking. Each step sent pain shooting through her blistered feet, but she pushed through it, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Emily stirred in her arms, letting out soft whimpers that broke Clara's heart. She whispered soothing words to the baby, promising they would find safety soon, even though she had no idea where that safety might be. Hours passed, and the landscape around her remained unchanged, barren, desolate, and unwelcoming. The water in her flask dwindled quickly, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she spotted something in the distance, a faint glimmer of movement near a cluster of trees. Squinting against the glare of the sun, she realized it was a man tending to a flock of sheep. Hope flickered within her, fragile but alive. Summoning the last of her strength, Clara approached cautiously. The man looked up as she drew near. His weathered face creased with curiosity. He was Navajo, dressed in simple clothes that blended with the earthy tones of the desert. His dark eyes studied her carefully, taking in the desperation etched onto her face and the tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "Please," Clara said, her voice hoarse from thirst and emotion. "Can you help us?" The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. He gestured for her to follow him, leading her to a nearby stream where cool, clear water flowed gently over smooth stones. Clara knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink deeply before splashing some onto her face. For the first time since leaving the cabin, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The man introduced himself as Tajine, though his English was limited. Despite the language barrier, his kindness shone through. He offered Clara food, a piece of dried meat and some wild berries, and helped her settle beneath the shade of a tree. As Emily slept peacefully in her arms, Clara felt a glimmer of hope returning. Perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't entirely alone in this vast, unforgiving world. That night, Tajine guided Clara to his hogan, a traditional Navajo dwelling made of wood and mud. It was humble yet sturdy, offering shelter from the biting cold that descended once the sun set. Inside, a small fire crackled warmly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Clara sat cross-legged on a woven mat, holding Emily close as Tajine prepared a simple meal. Though they came from different worlds, separated by culture and circumstance, there was an unspoken understanding between them. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet comfort of the hogan, Clara felt safe for the first time in what felt like forever. As the days passed, Clara began to adjust to her new surroundings under Tajine's care. The Navajo man spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. Every morning, he would rise before dawn to tend to his sheep, leaving Clara and Emily behind, in the safety of the hogan. Though she felt guilty for relying on him so heavily, Clara knew she had no choice but to accept his kindness. Slowly, she started learning how to contribute, watching Tajine closely as he went about his daily tasks. One of the first things Tajine taught Clara was how to gather water from the stream. He showed her which spots yielded the clearest flow, and explained the importance of conserving every drop. "Water is life," he said in broken English, pointing to the ground and then to the sky. Clara nodded, understanding the weight of his words, even if she couldn't fully grasp their depth. She practiced carrying the heavy clay pots back to the hogan, her arms aching with the effort but her spirit buoyed by the knowledge that she was becoming more self-reliant. Tajine also introduced Clara to the plants that grew wild around them. He pointed out which ones were safe to eat, like the prickly pear cactus whose fruit could be peeled and eaten, and the mesquite trees whose pods could be ground into flour. At first, Clara hesitated, unsure whether she could trust these unfamiliar foods, but hunger drove her to try, and soon she found herself marveling at the flavors, sweet, tangy, and earthy, all gifts from the land she had once thought barren. Every evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tajine would sit outside the hogan and mend tools or weave baskets. Clara joined him, cradling Emily in her lap as the baby drifted off to sleep. During these quiet moments, Tajine shared bits of his life with her, speaking slowly in his halting English. He told her about his family, who lived far away in another part of the desert, and how he had chosen this solitary existence to honor the traditions of his ancestors. Clara listened intently, asking questions when she dared and gradually piecing together a picture of a world vastly different from her own. Despite the growing bond between them, there were still moments of tension. Clara often struggled with feelings of inadequacy, convinced that she was nothing more than a burden to Tajine. One afternoon, as she clumsily attempted to grind mesquite pods into flour, frustration bubbled over. "I'll never get it right," she muttered, slamming the stone pestle down harder than intended. Dust flew up, coating her hands and face. Tajine stopped what he was doing and walked over to her. Kneeling beside her, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Patience," he said simply, picking up the pestle himself and demonstrating the proper technique. His movements were slow and deliberate, each stroke precise and rhythmic. Clara watched, feeling both humbled and inspired. She realized then that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about perseverance, about learning to adapt and grow despite setbacks. Emily, too, became a source of connection between them. The baby fascinated Tajine, who delighted in her tiny fingers and wide, curious eyes. Whenever Emily fussed or cried, Tajine would sing softly in his native tongue, rocking her gently until she calmed. Clara found comfort in these moments, grateful for the way Tajine treated her daughter not as a stranger, but as someone precious and worthy of love. It was a stark contrast to the cold indifference Thomas had shown, and it made Clara's heart ache with gratitude and grief. But life in the desert was not without its dangers. One night, as Clara lay awake listening to the wind howling through the canyon, she heard a low growl outside the hogan. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached instinctively for Emily, pulling the sleeping baby closer to her chest. Tajine stirred beside her, instantly alert. Grabbing a torch, he stepped outside, his silhouette illuminated by the flickering light. Clara followed cautiously, peering over his shoulder. In the distance, two glowing eyes reflected the firelight. A coyote, drawn perhaps by the smell of food or the sound of the baby. Tajine raised the torch higher, shouting loudly and waving it in the air. The animal hesitated, then slunk back into the darkness. Clara exhaled shakily, realizing for the first time just how vulnerable they were out here, yet she also felt a surge of admiration for Tajine's calmness and resourcefulness. The encounter left Clara restless, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen if danger came again. What if next time it wasn't just a coyote? What if it was something worse, something neither of them could fight off? These fears gnawed at her, keeping her awake long after Tajine had gone back inside and fallen asleep. She stared at the ceiling of the hogan, replaying the events of the past weeks in her mind. Everything had changed so quickly, so dramatically. She wondered if she would ever feel truly safe again. Still, amidst the uncertainty, small victories kept her going. One day, while gathering firewood near the stream, Clara spotted a cluster of wildflowers blooming defiantly against the harsh landscape. Their colors, bright yellows and purples, seemed almost miraculous in such an arid place. She picked a few and brought them back to the hogan, arranging them in a makeshift vase made from a hollowed-out gourd. When Tajine saw them, he smiled, nodding approvingly. "Beautiful," he said, touching one of the petals lightly. That simple act of creating beauty gave Clara a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since leaving Thomas, she allowed herself to imagine a future, not one defined by fear or hardship, but by resilience and hope. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here. As the weeks turned into months, Clara noticed subtle changes in herself. Her body grew stronger from the physical labor, her hands calloused but capable. Her confidence grew as well, bolstered by the skills Tajine had patiently taught her. Even her relationship with Emily deepened. She found joy in watching her daughter learn and grow, marveling at the way the baby's laughter seemed to echo through the canyon like music. Yet, despite these positive changes, Clara couldn't shake the lingering worry that her past might catch up with her. Rumors traveled fast among settlers, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone discovered where she had gone. Would Thomas come looking for her? Would others follow? The thought sent chills down her spine, but she refused to let fear consume her. Instead, she focused on the present, on the life she was building with Tajine's help. One evening, as they sat together outside the hogan, Tajine handed Clara a small wooden carving he had been working on. It was a figure of a woman holding a child, its features rough but unmistakable. Clara stared at it, tears welling up in her eyes. "For you," Tajine said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She clutched the carving tightly, overwhelmed by the gesture. It wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of everything Tajine had given her: shelter, guidance, and most importantly, hope. In that moment, Clara realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, she felt ready to face whatever challenges came her way. As the seasons began to shift, Clara noticed subtle changes in the desert around her. The scorching heat of summer gave way to cooler mornings and evenings, though the sun still burned fiercely during the day. Tajine explained that this was the time when the land prepared itself for rest, a brief pause before winter's chill settled in. For Clara, it marked another phase in her journey, a chance to reflect on how far she had come and to prepare for what lay ahead. By now, she had grown more comfortable with her new life. She no longer felt like an outsider looking in. Instead, she saw herself as part of the rhythm of the desert. Each morning, she rose early to help Tajine with his chores, fetching water, gathering firewood, or grinding mesquite pods into flour. Her hands were rough and calloused, but they carried strength she hadn't known she possessed. She took pride in her work, knowing that each task brought her one step closer to independence. Emily, too, was thriving. The baby's giggles echoed through the canyon, bringing lightness to even the toughest days. Clara marveled at how quickly her daughter was growing, her tiny fingers reaching out to touch everything around her. One afternoon, as Emily sat on a woven blanket beneath the shade of a tree, she managed to pull herself up onto wobbly legs for the first time. Clara gasped, tears springing to her eyes as she watched her daughter take those tentative steps toward balance. Tajine chuckled softly, clapping his hands in encouragement. "Strong," he said, pointing at Emily. Clara nodded, beaming with pride. But alongside these moments of joy came reminders of the dangers that lurked just beyond their peaceful existence. One evening, as Clara and Tajine sat outside the hogan sharing a meal, they heard hoofbeats in the distance. The sound sent a jolt of fear through Clara's body. She glanced at Tajine, whose expression remained calm but alert. He stood up, quietly, motioning for Clara to stay put while he investigated. Clara obeyed, clutching Emily tightly as she listened to the fading hoofbeats. Her mind raced with possibilities. Who could it be? Settlers passing through? Or worse, Thomas searching for her? She wanted to call out to Tajine, to beg him to come back, but she forced herself to remain silent. After what felt like an eternity, he returned, shaking his head slightly. "Gone," he said simply, settling back down beside her. Though he didn't elaborate, Clara understood enough to know that whoever had been riding wasn't friendly. That night, sleep eluded Clara. Every creak of the wind, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps drawing closer. She held Emily close, whispering reassurances to both her daughter and herself. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but she pushed through, determined not to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she focused on practical solutions. With Tajine's guidance, she began learning how to defend herself. He taught her how to use a knife effectively, showing her how to hold it steady and strike with precision. He also showed her how to set simple traps using materials found in the desert, explaining that being prepared was key to survival. Though Clara appreciated Tajine's efforts to protect her, she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was inevitable. Rumors continued to circulate among the settlers about a runaway wife living with a Navajo man. Some dismissed them as idle gossip, but others grew suspicious, wondering if such stories held truth. Clara knew it was only a matter of time before someone decided to investigate further, and when that happened, she doubted they would approach with kindness. Despite these looming threats, there were moments of peace that reminded Clara why she had chosen this path. One such moment came on a crisp autumn morning when she accompanied Tajine to check on his sheep. They walked side by side, the air filled with the earthy scent of sagebrush and the distant call of birds. As they reached the grazing area, Tajine stopped suddenly, pointing toward the horizon. Following his gaze, Clara saw a group of wild horses galloping across the plain, their manes flowing like waves against the golden sunlight. The sight took her breath away. "They are free," Tajine said, his voice tinged with reverence. Clara nodded, understanding what he meant. Those horses weren't bound by fences or rules. They roamed where they pleased, untamed and unafraid. Watching them, Clara felt a flicker of envy. How wonderful it must be, she thought, to live without fear of pursuit or judgment. Yet even as she envied their freedom, she realized she was finding her own version of it here, in this unlikely corner of the world. Back at the Hogan, Clara spent her evenings weaving baskets under Tajine's watchful eye. It was slow, painstaking work, but she found solace in the repetitive motion of threading strips of yucca fiber together. Each completed basket represented progress, not just in skill, but in confidence. When she finished her first usable basket, Tajine smiled approvingly, nodding as if to say, "You see, you can do it." These small victories kept Clara grounded, reminding her of her resilience. Still, there were times when doubt crept in, whispering cruel lies about her worth. On one particularly difficult day, after struggling to repair a leaky section of the Hogan's roof, Clara sank to the ground in frustration. Tears streamed down her face as she berated herself for being clumsy and useless. Tajine knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No shame," he said firmly, meeting her gaze. "Try again." His words struck a chord deep within her. Shame had followed her for so long. Shame for failing Thomas, for needing help, for not being strong enough. But here, in this place where survival depended on perseverance rather than perfection, she was beginning to shed that burden. Slowly, she wiped her tears and stood up, ready to try once more. As the weeks passed, Clara became more attuned to the rhythms of the land. She learned to read the signs of approaching storms, recognizing the way the wind shifted or the clouds gathered in thick clusters. She discovered which plants bloomed before rain, and which animals sought shelter when bad weather loomed. These lessons connected her to the desert in ways she never imagined possible, transforming it from a harsh adversary into a teacher and ally. Yet, even as she grew stronger, Clara couldn't ignore the weight of her past. One night, as she tucked Emily into bed, she caught herself staring at the baby's face, tracing the delicate curve of her cheek with her finger. So much of Emily's future rested on Clara's shoulders. What kind of life could she offer her daughter in this isolated place? Would Emily grow up resenting her for choosing exile over stability? These questions haunted Clara, keeping her awake long after the fire had burned low. Tajine seemed to sense her unease. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars, he turned to her and said, "You strong woman." His tone was gentle, yet firm, leaving no room for argument. Clara looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "I don't feel strong," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel lost sometimes." Tajine nodded as if he understood completely. "Lost is okay," he replied. "Find way back. Always find way." His words stayed with her long after they retired for the night, echoing in her mind like a promise. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet, but she was learning to trust the process, to believe that even when she felt uncertain, she was still moving forward. And so, Clara continued building her new life, brick by brick. With each passing day, she grew more confident in her abilities and more grateful for Tajine's unwavering support. Though challenges lay ahead, she faced them with a quiet determination, knowing that she had already overcome so much. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream, not of escape, but of possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, happiness was within reach after all. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened, and the desert began to show its quieter side. The mornings were crisp, with a thin layer of frost sometimes coating the ground, sparkling like tiny diamonds under the rising sun. Clara had grown accustomed to the rhythms of this land, but she still found herself marveling at how quickly time seemed to pass. It felt as though only yesterday she had stumbled upon Tajine by the stream, desperate and afraid. Now, months later, she was no longer the same woman who had fled her old life. Emily continued to grow stronger and more curious with each passing day. She crawled around the hogan, exploring every corner, her laughter filling the small space with warmth. Clara often watched her daughter with a mixture of awe and pride, amazed at how resilient Emily was despite their uncertain circumstances. One afternoon, while Clara was weaving baskets outside, Emily managed to pull herself up using the edge of a wooden stool. For a moment she stood there, swaying slightly, her wide eyes fixed on Clara. Then, with a triumphant squeal, she let go and took 2 wobbly steps forward before plopping down onto the dirt floor. Clara laughed, clapping her hands in delight. "You did it!" she exclaimed, scooping Emily into her arms and covering her face with kisses. Tajine, who had been nearby tending to his sheep, looked over and smiled. He walked over to them, crouching down to inspect Emily's progress. "She's strong," he said, nodding approvingly. "Like mother." Clara blushed at the compliment, though she knew he meant it sincerely. His words reminded her of how far she had come, not just physically but emotionally. She had started this journey broken and full of fear, yet here she was, finding joy in the simplest moments. But even as life seemed to settle into a rhythm, Clara couldn't ignore the tension that lingered beneath the surface. The rumors about her presence in the area hadn't faded. If anything, they had grown louder. Settlers passing through occasionally stopped near Tajine's camp, asking questions or casting suspicious glances toward the hogan. Some were polite enough, exchanging pleasantries before moving on. Others, however, made no effort to hide their disapproval. They muttered about mixing with savages and questioned why a white woman would choose to live among the Navajo. Clara tried not to let their words bother her, but they stung nonetheless. One day, as Clara and Tajine worked together repairing the roof of the hogan, they heard the sound of approaching riders. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She recognized the hoofbeats immediately. They were too heavy and deliberate to belong to wanderers or travelers. These were men with purpose. Tajine placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his calm demeanor masking any concern he might have felt. "Stay inside," he instructed quietly, grabbing a tool from the ground as if to continue working. Clara obeyed, retreating into the hogan with Emily clutched tightly in her arms. Through a narrow crack in the wall, she peered outside, watching as 3 men rode into view. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw Thomas among them. He sat tall in his saddle, his face hard and unreadable. Beside him were 2 other settlers, their expressions grim as they scanned the area. Tajine greeted them cautiously, keeping his distance. "What you want?" he asked, his voice steady, but firm. Thomas dismounted, striding toward him with an air of authority. "We're looking for my wife," he said, his tone sharp and accusing. "Word is she's been seen around here." Clara's stomach churned as she listened, her grip tightening on Emily. She wanted to scream, to tell Thomas to leave her alone, but she forced herself to remain silent. Tajine didn't flinch. "No woman here," he replied simply, meeting Thomas's gaze without hesitation. Thomas narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "I know she's close. If you're hiding her, you'll regret it." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. Clara held her breath, praying that Tajine wouldn't give her away. To her relief, he remained composed, shrugging slightly as if indifferent to Thomas's anger. "Look if you want," he said, gesturing toward the hogan. "No one here but me." Thomas hesitated, then signaled to his companions. Together they dismounted and began searching the area, poking through Tajine's belongings and inspecting the hogan from the outside. Clara pressed herself against the back wall, shielding Emily with her body. Her mind raced with panic. What if they decided to barge in? What if they discovered her hiding place? After what felt like hours, The men finally mounted their horses again, clearly frustrated by their lack of success. Thomas glared at Tajine one last time before turning his horse around. "This isn't over," he warned, his voice dripping with venom. "If I find out you're lying." Tajine didn't respond, merely watching as the riders disappeared into the distance. Only when their hoofbeats faded completely did he exhale deeply, visibly relaxing. Clara emerged from the hogan, trembling with relief. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tajine shook his head, brushing off her gratitude as if it were unnecessary. "Safe now," he said simply. Though the immediate danger had passed, the encounter left Clara shaken. She realized that staying hidden wasn't a long-term solution. Sooner or later, someone would discover her, and she couldn't risk putting Tajine in harm's way. That night, as they sat together outside the hogan, she voiced her fears. "They'll come back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and next time they might not leave empty-handed." Tajine listened silently, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he nodded. "You right," he agreed. "Need plan." For the next several days, Clara and Tajine worked tirelessly to prepare for the possibility of another confrontation. They devised strategies to keep Clara and Emily concealed should anyone return unexpectedly. Tajine showed her a hidden cave nestled deep within the canyon walls, accessible only by a narrow, winding path. "Here safe," he explained, leading her inside. The space was small but secure, large enough to shelter them for a short time if needed. Clara memorized the route, practicing until she could navigate it blindfolded. In addition to creating a safe haven, Tajine taught Clara how to use a bow and arrow. Though she struggled at first, missing her target repeatedly, she refused to give up. Each missed shot fueled her determination to improve. By the end of the week, she could hit a stationary target from a reasonable distance. "Good," Tajine said, smiling proudly. "Now you protect yourself." Despite these preparations, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger loomed on the horizon. The settlers' growing hostility worried her, not just for her sake but for Tajine's as well. She knew that associating with a Native American man made her a target, and she feared the consequences if tensions escalated further. Yet, she also knew that leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. She owed Tajine too much to abandon him now, especially when he had done so much to help her. As winter approached, bringing colder nights and occasional rainstorms, Clara found solace in the routines they had established. She spent her days gathering supplies, mending clothes, and caring for Emily, all while keeping an ear tuned for any sign of trouble. In quieter moments, she reflected on how much she had changed since arriving in the desert. Once timid and unsure of herself, she now carried a quiet strength born of necessity. She understood now that survival wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about adapting, learning, and growing stronger with each challenge. One evening, as she sat beside Tajine watching the stars, she felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. Despite everything she had endured, the cruelty of Thomas, the uncertainty of exile, the constant threat of discovery, she had found a kind of peace here. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was hers. And for the first time in years, she felt truly free. Winter settled over the desert, bringing with it a chill that seeped into every corner of the hogan. The mornings were crisp, and frost clung to the dry earth like a fragile lace blanket. Clara wrapped herself and Emily in layers of woven blankets, grateful for the warmth they provided against the biting cold. Though the desert was known for its harsh conditions, this season felt particularly unforgiving. Still, Clara had learned to adapt, finding ways to keep herself and her daughter safe despite the challenges. Tajine remained a steady presence, his quiet strength guiding them through the tougher days. He showed Clara how to build fires that burned longer and hotter using dried mesquite wood and animal dung as fuel. Together, they patched up cracks in the hogan's walls to keep out the wind, stuffing them with mud and strips of cloth. Each task brought them closer, their shared efforts creating an unspoken bond that neither needed to put into words. Clara often caught herself thinking about how different her life might have been if she had never met Tajine. Would she still be alive? Would Emily? The threat of discovery still loomed large, casting a shadow over even the happiest moments. Clara had grown more cautious, avoiding open areas during the day and staying hidden whenever she heard hoofbeats or voices in the distance. Tajine warned her that tensions among the settlers were rising, fueled by rumors and distrust of anyone who associated with Native Americans. "They watch," he said one evening, pointing toward the horizon where faint trails of smoke rose from distant camps. "Be careful." Clara nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She knew that her presence here put Tajine at risk, and the thought weighed heavily on her conscience. Yet she also knew she couldn't leave, not yet. Not when she still owed him so much. Instead, she focused on becoming more self-reliant, determined to repay his kindness in whatever way she could. One morning, while gathering firewood near the stream, Clara noticed something unusual. A group of riders camped not far from Tajine's land. Her heart sank as she recognized some of the men from Thomas's earlier search party. They weren't alone this time. Several others had joined them, their faces grim and purposeful. Clara ducked behind a cluster of bushes, her pulse racing as she watched them set up tents and tether their horses. It was clear they weren't planning to leave anytime soon. She hurried back to the hogan, her mind spinning with panic. "They're here," she whispered to Tajine, her voice trembling. More than before. Tajine listened intently, his expression unreadable. Without saying a word, he grabbed his bow and quiver, motioning for Clara to follow him. They moved quickly and quietly, retreating to the hidden cave he had shown her weeks earlier. Once inside, he handed her the bow and arrows, reminding her how to use them. "Stay quiet," he instructed. "I go see." Clara wanted to protest, to beg him not to leave her alone, but she knew better than to argue. Instead, she nodded, clutching Emily tightly as Tajine disappeared into the canyon. The hours that followed felt endless, each minute stretching into eternity. The only sounds were the soft whimpers of Emily and the distant echo of voices carried by the wind. Clara strained her ears, trying to make sense of what was happening outside. Were they searching for her? Had they found the hogan? Her imagination ran wild, conjuring worst-case scenarios that left her breathless with fear. When Tajine finally returned, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. His face was grave, and Clara's stomach tightened with dread. "They know you here," he said simply, crouching beside her. "Ask questions. Look for signs." Clara swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Tajine placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Wait," he replied. "Not move until dark. Then we go." As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the world outside grew eerily silent. Tajine led Clara and Emily out of the cave, moving swiftly and silently through the shadows. He guided them along a narrow path that wound deep into the canyon, away from the prying eyes of the settlers. Every step felt like a gamble, every sound a potential threat. Clara held her breath, praying that they wouldn't be spotted. After what felt like hours, they reached a secluded spot where Tajine had prepared a makeshift shelter. It was small and crude, little more than a lean-to made of branches and brush, but it offered enough protection to keep them hidden. Exhausted and shaken, Clara collapsed onto the ground, holding Emily close as the baby slept peacefully in her arms. Tajine sat nearby, keeping watch as the stars blinked overhead. For the next few days, they stayed hidden, venturing out only briefly to gather food and water. Clara struggled with the isolation, missing the comfort of the hogan and the routines they had built together. But she understood that staying put was too dangerous. The settlers' presence was a constant reminder of the risks they faced, and she couldn't afford to be careless. During this time, Clara and Tajine spoke little, conserving their energy and focusing on survival. Yet their silence spoke volumes. Clara realized how much she relied on him, not just for guidance but for emotional support. His calm demeanor and unwavering determination gave her strength when her own resolve faltered. In turn, she tried to repay his kindness by helping however she could, whether it was preparing meals or caring for Emily so he could rest. One evening, as they sat together under the cover of darkness, Clara broke the silence. "Why are you doing all this for us?" she asked, her voice tinged with guilt and gratitude. Tajine looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering light of the small fire they had built. "Family," he said simply, gesturing toward Clara and Emily. "You family now." His words brought tears to her eyes, and she reached out to touch his hand in thanks. For the first time since leaving Thomas, Clara felt like she truly belonged somewhere. This strange, rugged land had become her home, and Tajine had become her anchor. Despite everything they had endured, the danger, the uncertainty, the fear, she found peace in knowing that she wasn't alone. As the days passed, the settlers eventually moved on, their search seemingly abandoned. Clara and Tajine waited a little longer before returning to the Hogan, ensuring it was safe to do so. When they finally went back, Clara was struck by how much smaller it seemed after their time in hiding. Yet, it still felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe freely again. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be under the circumstances. Clara continued learning from Tajine, honing her skills and growing more confident in her ability to survive. She began teaching Emily simple Navajo phrases, wanting her daughter to connect with the culture that had saved them both. Watching Emily mimicked the sounds with wide-eyed curiosity filled Clara with hope for the future. Though the threat of discovery still lingered, Clara no longer let it control her. She had faced her fears head-on and come out stronger on the other side. With Tajine by her side, she believed they could overcome anything. And as she gazed out over the vast expanse of the desert, she realized that this place, once so foreign and intimidating, had become a part of her. It had tested her limits, pushed her to grow, and ultimately given her a second chance at life. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to dream, not of escape, but of building something meaningful here. Perhaps, just perhaps, happiness wasn't as far away as she once thought. Spring arrived slowly, bringing with it the promise of renewal. The desert, once barren and cold, began to awaken under the gentle warmth of longer days. Wildflowers bloomed in bursts of yellow, purple, and red, dotting the landscape like scattered jewels. Streams that had dwindled during winter swelled with melted snow, their waters clear and cool. Clara stood outside the Hogan one morning, breathing in the fresh air as Emily played nearby, her tiny hands reaching for blossoms she couldn't quite grasp. It was a moment of quiet beauty, a reminder that life always found a way to flourish even in the harshest places. Over the past months, Clara had transformed in ways she never thought possible. She no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance or someone dependent on others for survival. Instead, she carried herself with confidence, her body strong from hard work and her mind sharp from learning. Tajine had taught her not just how to live off the land, but also how to trust herself. He often said, "You stronger than you think." And now she believed him. Emily, too, was growing into a lively little girl. Her laughter rang out across the canyon, drawing smiles from both Clara and Tajine. She was fearless, crawling over rocks and chasing butterflies without a care in the world. Watching her explore, Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her daughter's health and happiness, but for the life they had built together. This wasn't the future she had imagined when Emily was born, yet it was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have dreamed. Still, the scars of the past lingered. Rumors about Clara continued to circulate among the settlers, though fewer people ventured near Tajine's camp now. Some whispered warnings, claiming that trouble would come if she stayed with the Navajo man. Others dismissed her entirely, as if she no longer existed. Clara didn't care what they thought. Their opinions held no power over her anymore. But she knew that her presence put Tajine at risk, and that weighed heavily on her heart. One evening as they sat together outside the Hogan, Tajine broke the silence. You ready? He asked, his voice calm but probing. Clara looked at him, startled by the question. Ready for what? She replied, though she already suspected the answer. To go, he said simply, gesturing toward the horizon. Find new place. Clara hesitated, her throat tightening with emotion. She had known this day might come, but she hadn't expected it so soon. I don't want to leave, she admitted, her voice trembling. This is my home now. Tajine nodded, understanding her reluctance. Home is where you safe, he said. Here not safe forever. You need own path. His words struck a chord deep within her. As much as she loved this place, and as much as she owed Tajine, she knew he was right. Staying here meant risking not only her safety but also his. She couldn't bear the thought of causing him harm because of her choices. Slowly she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Okay, she whispered. But I don't know where to go. Tajine smiled faintly, his expression reassuring. I help, he promised. Over the next few days, they prepared for the journey ahead. Tajine showed Clara how to pack light but efficiently, teaching her which items were essential and which could be left behind. They gathered supplies, dried meat, mesquite flour, water skins, and repaired the small cart they would use to carry Emily and their belongings. Clara worked tirelessly, determined to prove that she was ready for whatever lay ahead. On the morning of their departure, the sun rose in a blaze of gold, casting long shadows across the canyon. Clara stood outside the hogan, taking one last look at the place that had sheltered her through so much. Her chest tightened with a mix of sadness and gratitude. Turning to Tajine, she hugged him tightly, unable to find the words to express how much he meant to her. He patted her back gently, his touch steady and comforting. Be brave, he said. You strong woman. With Emily nestled securely, in the cart and their supplies packed tightly, Clara set off following the trail Tajine had marked for her. He walked beside her for a while, pointing out landmarks and sharing advice. Follow river, he instructed. Stay close to trees. People there will help. When they reached the edge of his territory, Tajine stopped, his face serious but kind. Go now, he said. Trust yourself. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. For a moment she wanted to turn back, to beg him to come with her. But she knew this was her journey, one she had to take alone. As she walked away, Clara glanced over her shoulder, watching Tajine grow smaller until he disappeared from view. Though her heart ached with loss, she felt a strange sense of freedom. Ahead of her stretched an unknown path, full of challenges but also possibilities. She clung to the lessons Tajine had taught her, not just about survival but about resilience, courage, and hope. The journey was difficult, testing every ounce of strength Clara had gained over the past year. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering cruel lies about her ability to succeed. But each time she pushed forward, reminding herself of everything she had overcome. Along the way, she encountered kindness from unexpected sources, a trader who shared food, a family who offered shelter for the night. Each act of generosity reminded her that humanity still existed, even in the most unlikely places. Eventually, Clara found a small settlement tucked into a valley near a winding river. It was modest, with only a handful of families living there, but it felt welcoming. The people were wary at first, unsure what to make of a woman traveling alone with a child. But Clara's determination and honesty won them over. She worked hard, contributing to the community and proving that she was worthy of their trust. In time, they accepted her as one of their own. Years passed and Emily grew into a bright, curious child, fluent in both English and Navajo thanks to the lessons Clara had taught her. Together, they built a life filled with purpose and joy. Clara often thought of Tajine, wondering how he was faring in the desert. She hoped he knew how grateful she was, how much his kindness had changed her life. One day, as Clara stood on a hill overlooking the settlement, she realized something profound. She had stopped running. For so long, her life had been defined by fear. Fear of Thomas, fear of the unknown, fear of failure. But now she faced the world with her head held high, unafraid of what the future might bring. She had found peace, not by escaping her past, but by embracing it, learning from it, and using it to shape who she was today. And as she watched Emily play in the distance, her laughter echoing through the valley, Clara knew she had made the right choice. This was her home now, a place where she could raise her daughter in safety and love. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free.